I think it was about a month ago or so that I was told we would be doing Macross, and so I jumped at it.
In the year 1999, a huge object fell from the heavens. A gigantic space battleship over 1,200 meters in length.
We didn't have any scripts at that time. I just had the DVD. I popped it in and started listening to it, and I realized about halfway through the very beginning narration that I was going to need more of a backstory, more information. So I immediately just stopped, didn't even try tackling any translation, and just got online, did a lot of research. This story is so huge. I mean, it's 36 episodes, and there's all these characters and all these mecha and all this massive history. I figured I had to sit down and take a look at that first, so that's what I did. If I don't understand the story, I could mistranslate something, misinterpret something. So it was very important for me to do that research first.
Thank goodness.
There were a couple almost sort of fanatical Japanese websites that really helped me out. Listed a lot of the characters and the mecha and whatnot. And the original Animego release had these liner notes by a man named Egan Liu, and so Googling his name turned up very quickly. A very extensive website called the Macross Compendium that also was very useful for me in figuring out this terminology in English.
And the Earth was once again at peace. The alien battleship, rebuilt by human hands, was given a new name with which to start its new life. The Macross.
Well, initially our goal wasn't to retranslate Macross because it had already been translated. Initially I was brought on board to analyze that translation and just to verify the accuracy of it. What had happened, though, was I found that as I went through the translation, there were a few issues that I thought could use addressing. And as I began to address those issues, I found that more and more of them were, I was seeing more and more of them. Everything from slight misinterpretations to problems with accuracy to misheard lines. Truthfully, I don't think of myself as the project translator. I would like to think of myself as the project editor. Sometimes the editing process will be simply changing a few lines. Sometimes it will be completely rewriting from start to finish. In my case, I read the Japanese and I hear the Japanese, and two things happen. I mean, I process the words themselves, and I process the feel of the words. How does it sound? How is it delivered? What is the emotional content of the words? And so there's that process. And then I guess almost instantaneously, like when you read a book in English, you hear the words in your head. Well, that's what happens with me. I process the Japanese and I just hear the English in my head, so I just type it out. There are some instances where it just doesn't cross over. For example, like idioms. I mean, that's the same in English or as in Japanese. I mean, I remember when I was living in Japan, I used to sort of laboriously try and translate some of my favorite idioms into English. He doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. And I just met with these blank stares, and they're like, what is the hole? Is he going to go to the bathroom in the hole? I'm like, no, he doesn't know the difference. He can't. And it just was completely lost on them. And the same thing goes from Japanese to English. Some idioms just don't translate. Another thing is just simply cultural concepts. Or you say a word and you can translate it literally, but the word has another meaning altogether in context. I think an example of this is in episode 6. You have a character who says something that, literally would be translated as sorry. My translation was thanks, and the reason for this is it's very much part of the Japanese culture that's built into the language. I mean, when somebody does something and you want to thank them for it, lots of times Japanese will say, I'm sorry. I mean, you can go to a restaurant, somebody brings something for you, and you'll say, sorry. They mean thank you. It's just sort of a cultural thing, like, sorry for making you go out of your way, and I thank you for it.
But this is me you're talking about.
Well, thanks, Dave.
If you want to look at the culture of Japan, they have a very highly stratified society with clear delineations between who is at what level, quote unquote, and there were the requisite grammatical forms to reflect that.
Is that you, Hikaru? I know that voice! Senpai! It's been a while!
You actually find this in Macross. We have the character of Hikaru who constantly calls Roy Fokker, calls him senpai, which is, well, one of the hallmarks of the Japanese culture is the senpai kohai, or senior junior relationship, and as a sign of respect. I don't think Hikaru ever calls Roy, he calls him senpai, and so it was chosen to keep that intact.
Damn it! Hey! Get the hell out of here!
The issue of translating Japanese curse words into English is really kind of a mixed bag, I think, simply because this is a perfect instance of where you can't necessarily take words at their face value. In English, you have this wide variety of curse words at our disposal, and if I say, hey, f you, buddy, I mean, it cannot be interpreted any other way. But in Japanese, a lot of it is contextual.
Shit!
I mean, you have a word, one of the most often used curse words there is kuso, which literally means shit. But I mean, it doesn't always mean shit. And a perfect example of this is the fact that cartoon characters will say this word. I used to ride the subway, and there was this great little poster that was up on the side of the train, and it had this lady. It was like, you know, the many faces of the average office worker, and it showed her, you know, vexed and, you know, frustrated and overworked. And in one, she's going kuso, which again literally means shit. But in this case, it's more sort of a vexed, oh man, oh gosh. So it's all contextual. You know, if I curse under my breath, it might not necessarily mean shit. But if I point to you and say, but most definitely. So I think you'll find that if you really want to sort of keep an ear out for the way that certain words are translated within Macross, you'll find that A isn't necessarily always B, depending upon the forcefulness and the context. So a lot of that is contextual.
What planet is that?
The fifth planetary body counting inwards. It is my belief that they will attempt to use its cluttered orbital debris as a means of cover.
As I'm going through the translation, I find that the Zentradi, the alien race, have referred to Saturn as being the fifth planet, and I kind of stopped and was like, well, wait a minute, it's the sixth planet. This doesn't make any sense. So I, kept watching, and sure enough, in the next scene, they showed a view screen of the Zentradi, viewing our solar system, and it showed Saturn, where it begins in the correct position. So I was like, okay, just kind of chalked it up to error, corrected the error, wrote a note, and then moved on. And then came around to episode 7, and in the original script, it had written Mars as being the fourth planet, and that was scratched out and handwritten in 7th. And so we had the second instance of there being a discrepancy, but now it became clear that this was, it wasn't a discrepancy of oversight. Someone had clearly wanted this to be the Zentradi counting system. It didn't make any sense, because even if you count from the sun going outward or from Pluto inward, the numbers didn't match up. But when we have Mars and then we have Saturn, I kind of looked at those, and then it all made perfect sense. The Zentradi have knowledge of a 10th planet and are counting backward from that, including that 10th planet. And when you think about it that way, then suddenly Saturn is the 5th planet, Mars is the 7th. But the thing of it is, it's never addressed in the actual show. They just sort of include it, I guess, as an in-joke to anyone in the know. Talking this over with Matt Greenfield, the producer for the show, he decided that to be on the safe side, it would be better to render this as orbital body rather than planet. So my final translation for episode 6 was that it was the 5th orbital body counting outward. I was pulling out my hair over that one, just sort of storming around the office. It doesn't make any sense! And one of my fellow translators said, "Does it have to be a 10th planet?" And I was like, that's it. There is a 10th planet, and they're counting backward from it. As part of Robotech, Macross was really what sort of caught my interest in Japanese animation, and what I think provided at least some of the initial impetus for me to start learning Japanese in university. So I mean, it really holds a very special place, for me in my heart, and I think in the hearts of a lot of other people who are in my same age bracket. So one of the reasons I really wanted to do this for myself was for that sort of sentimental value and for the importance it holds for me. So one of the things I set out to do was to make this to help make this a definitive edition of Macross, and part of that on my end entails just doing the best possible, most accurate translation possible. There's a scene actually in episode 8, I think it is, and the setup behind that is that Hikaru has these 2 new people under his wing. He has Max, of course, and Kakizaki, and he keeps telling them he's going to take them out to some really nice place. And so they're out there walking around, the town, and all of a sudden Kakizaki is like, whoa, like a kid in a candy store, and he runs down this little alleyway. And he's like, oh, is this the place you wanted to take us to? All right. And, I'm not really sure how well that carries over, but actually what he's looking at is a little alleyway it's basically the Macross's red light district, and there in the foreground you have like the Black Cat Club, and it looks kind of upscale, so it's probably what you'd call a hostess bar or a snack. But then right next door to that you have this very pink, sort of garish looking place, and then further on down the alleyway you have these girls standing outside their respective stores. So yeah, what they're definitely looking at is the red light district, and of course pink being representative of the sex for pay, or at least very risque industry in Japan. I thought it was kind of amusing actually that you have the entire population of South Itaria Island, and they've been, teleported out into deep space, and things are crumbling around them, and they're rescued and pulled on board, and they rebuild their city on board the ship. But by God, they also have to rebuild their red light district. So I thought that was kind of amusing.
隊長、さっきの民名って子、シャンですな。隊長のこれですか？
The raised pinky gesture. Oh man, that kind of took me back seeing that one. I mean, the raised pinky gesture is traditionally accompanied by the word kore, which means this. You're like, so she's your this, and that's a kind of a slang term to mean your girlfriend. And I guess the flip side, the counterpart to that is you're this, which is your boyfriend. But I mean, at least in my own experience, I never really saw them that much in real life. So it was kind of like, oh man, he pulled out the pinky gesture. And actually, speaking of that and sort of the nostalgia value for a lot of this show, I mean, it was kind of funny. In that episode, around episodes 8 to 9, we see a bunch of different interesting things go on in terms of just the slang that gets thrown around in the show. I mean, we're looking at a show that's like 20, so years old, and so you have this slang,
民名ちゃんってわりかしいプロポーションしてるの知ってたか？あ、トランジスタグラマーってやつだよ。
When Max is referring to Minmei, he calls her this sort of what they call waseego, which is basically made in Japan English. He calls her a transistor glamour.
トランジスタグラマー。
I'm like, transistor glamour? Heck is that? And, did some research, and sure enough, Anime Go's original translation had it right on the ball. It's like a small, compact body, but with all just the right features. And then you had another one. You had Kakizaki. He referred to Minmei as Shan. And I'm like, Shan? What the heck is Shan? So again, did some more research, found out it comes from German, Schön. And it means basically an attractive young girl. Languages move on, and I guess Japanese is no exception.
それより敵の位置の表示ぐらい送ってくれても？
それが軍用装備がうまくそちらに。
あれ？
I think it's in episode 9, you have Hikaru, and he goes out in the Armored Valkyrie because they've picked up this incoming signal from the 3 Zentradi. And so he doesn't want to miss out, of course, on Minmei's big, Miss Macross pageant. So he dials in to the transmission, and just for a second we catch a little bit of what counts for a commercial. You just catch the very tail end of it, but it's talking about a store called Zenipro in the 3rd Ward, and I didn't see how the finished subtitles were in the original version, but in the translation that I saw, it had a slight misspelling of Zeneburo, and when I heard that, I was like, it's Zenipro, and Zene is short for Zenedar, or general, and pro for products, general products, and that actually the name itself is taken from the Ringworld series written by Larry Niven, and that name was then in turn used to refer to a small store that was set up by 2 gentlemen, Takeda and Okada, and those 2 would coincidentally later go on to found, among other people, Studio Gainax. So it was very much a sort of in-joke to those in the know. It's like, hey, if you're a sci-fi fan, especially sort of an underground one, and you'll know the store I'm talking about. It's General Products in the 3rd Ward, and so I thought that was kind of neat.